Welcome to SBC This Week, a weekly news roundup from the Southern Baptist Convention, as well as guests from today's top church leaders. I'm Brandon Porter. Laura Erlanson is here with me. Hi, Laura.
Hi, Brandon.
Loving that blue sweater.
Yeah, it's got your Kentucky Wildcat blue on it today, but it's also for my Gators.
There you go. There's a little green. Yeah, we won't talk about the green that's in there, but that's okay.
Well, and blue, too. Orange and blue. Yeah. So who you got in your bracket?
So I ended up with every bracket that I filled out. So I did three, a family one, and then church, and then here at work we did one. And I ended up with an all SEC Final Four.
Me too.
And one of them, I think I ended up with Alabama and Auburn. I was feeling that one day in the championship. And then the next day I was feeling Auburn and Tennessee in the championship.
Okay.
So,
okay.
Yep. How about you?
So I picked the Gators to win the whole thing.
Of course, yeah. Mm-hmm.
But I really do think they could do it.
I agree.
It's not wishful thinking.
I know. I think you're right.
Might.
Yep.
But we'll see. But it is an all SEC Final Four, and I really think that could happen too, which is crazy.
Yeah. In our brackets, it's an all SEC Final Four.
Right.
We'll see.
Yeah, we will see.
So yeah. I'm you always have to be aware of the Valparaiso State or Davidson or somebody who gets hot and just takes off. Makes
it's Gonzaga
it to the Elite Eight.
sometimes. That goes crazy, which would be fun. I love
it
that.
would absolutely. So I love to see my bracket blow up right in front of me. There's nothing better than that.
Yeah, those Cinderella stories are the best. That's why March Madness is so great.
Yep. That's right. Well, lots going on this week. Lots of DR stories out of the Midwest, the Southeast, and just an interesting combination of heavy rains and flooding in some places, tornadoes in places, and then we have wildfires in some places. And so we're going to talk about that. Southern Baptist DR workers, of course, have been on the scene of those disasters during the week. We're going to talk some about a Lifeway Research study that is really encouraging, Laura, about the growth that so many churches are experiencing post-pandemic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, that is an interesting study. And I think we've seen it kind of borne out in some other stories that we've had and some other even studies of church attendance and things that have not just rebounded since the pandemic, but maybe even grown a little bit. So, we'll be talking about that.
Yeah, and this week at Baptist Press, we published a timeline. We went back to November of 2021. If you'll remember, the annual meeting was in Nashville that year, and we walk through all the costs that have been involved in the sexual abuse investigation and created a kind of a timeline story of that. And so we're going to talk to you about that a little bit in just a few moments. That's where we're headed next. First, though, we want to tell you that SBC This Week is sponsored, and we are grateful for that. We're sponsored by the Israeli Ministry of Tourism. And they're excited to announce that a one-of-a-kind structure used for ritual practices during the temple period was discovered in the city of David. It's an exceptional structure that was uncovered by the Israel Antiquities Authority during excavations earlier this year. It's the only known ritual structure from this period discovered in Jerusalem and one of very few around the land of Israel. They believe that it traces all the way back to the 8th century BC, and that's the middle period when the kings of Judah ruled. So for those of you who have been seminary students or just excelled in Sunday school, that's definitely some time that you have studied. And for those of you who have been in Bible college or seminary, you've had some test questions about that. So very interesting there, an artifact that has been uncovered. If you'd like to go see it, of course, you can learn more at holyland.israel.travel and begin your journey there, your spiritual journey today. All right. So, Laura, first we want to start with this DR story that we mentioned earlier. Mississippi, Tennessee, Arkansas, Oklahoma. Just a rough weekend and a rough week for folks there. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we'll start in Arkansas. We had a story Monday. Of course, if you live anywhere in the Midwest, Southeast portion of the United States, you were feeling it over the weekend, last weekend. And Arkansas had 2 EF4 tornadoes, which are pretty unusual. Yeah. And Randy Garrett, the state director of the disaster relief there in Arkansas, just said there was up to 190 mile an hour winds and a lot of destruction that they're working. Send Relief reported that in Oklahoma, they were providing 2,000 meals a day. Now, this is not necessarily for tornadoes, but the storm system it was the same storm system, really, and it caused wildfires in Oklahoma. And wildfires were responsible for destroying more than 400 homes, caused 4 deaths, and included the destruction of a church in Oklahoma, Rainy Mountain Kiowa Indian Baptist Church, which is a historic Native American congregation there in Oklahoma. The sanctuary built in 1921.
Wow.
And that sanctuary was destroyed in a wildfire. We also had tornadoes in Missouri, tornadoes in Alabama. There were at least 2 Southern Baptist churches that were pretty heavily damaged in Alabama from tornadoes. And then, like you said, Mississippi also just faced devastating destruction. We also talked to Hubert Yates, who's their DR director there in Mississippi. At least 39 people were killed in these storms, and a lot of those were in Mississippi. The governor, Tate Reeves, governor of Mississippi, spoke at a church, one of our churches in Tylertown, Mississippi, and just talked about the help that was available to people, and included Southern Baptists in his comments there. And widespread devastation and destruction.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
Southern Baptists are already, of course, as always, on the ground helping.
Yeah, absolutely. Also in Tennessee, recovery from this storm, the Tennessee's First Lady, Maria Lee, was there working alongside some nonprofits that also were helping and were serving. And
that was actually Helene recovery in Tennessee.
Oh, okay.
That was this was, of course, it's been about 6 months since Hurricane Helene, but Tennessee Baptists and others from other states have been there the whole time and are still there helping rebuild homes, helping get people in permanent structures, people that are still living in tents. And the First Lady of Maria Lee in Tennessee was visiting one of those job sites, one of those Southern Baptist disaster relief job sites where they're still and will be for a long time recovering from Hurricane Helene.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things, Laura, I thought was interesting in that story was it pointed out that Tennessee Baptist disaster relief volunteers have invested 6,671 hours of service since January 1st alone. Just since January 1st, just one state DR team. And, you think about that when you could multiply that across multiple states. And so we're just always so humbled and grateful by our DR workers who are there. And certainly we want to be praying for those who have been affected by the storms like Helene from last fall, but here are these that have happened in the last 10 days or so, and so just continue to lift them up. Go get trained. Go become a DR volunteer.
Absolutely.
And look for opportunities to go out and serve because they are plentiful. And,
absolutely, and we will have a story. Great. I'm sorry, we'll have a story. Maybe today. This is Friday. We're recording this March 20th or Thursday. Sorry, Thursday, March 20th, and maybe today, maybe tomorrow, maybe Friday, we'll run a story that is a 6-month Helene follow-up that gives kind of more of these numbers and details about what has been accomplished, but what still remains to be accomplished, which is a lot. And one of those things they're saying is, please get trained. Please come help us.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, to dial the calendar back a little bit, we go back to June of 2021. And this week, Laura, we have released a story at Baptist Press that is a timeline of sexual abuse investigation-related costs. That came out of some conversation that you and I and Scott Barkley, who wrote the story, had following the EC meeting back in February of this year, so just about a month ago. And the reporting of those numbers by the financial folks, and we just began to really think about piecing this back all the way to that summer of 2021 to walk through that. And Scott did a great job of that. It was lots of, not only did he do a lot of digging in previous Baptist Press stories and in other places, but he went back and he watched video from annual meetings and EC meetings. And so just a lot of investigative reporting there by Scott to dig up and to put that timeline together into place.
Yeah, and this is one of those stories that kept getting longer the more we worked on it.
Yeah.
Because we would think, okay, well, this is good, but maybe it needs a little more context. So what if we also mentioned this? And what if we also mentioned this? And we were going back and finding other stories that kind of helped tell a fuller picture, paint a fuller picture of how now here we are, $13 million later in the costs, the financial costs related to the investigation and the subsequent, legal costs pertaining to that. And so the story is long, and it's got, I should have counted the links in it. I wish I would have done that before we started recording, because it's a lot of links. It's a lot of links. So you could read this story, and then you could also read these 25 other stories that we link to, maybe more than that, I don't know, to kind of help just give people a perspective and a retrospective of kind of how we got here.
Yeah.
This is the timeline of how we got here. And of course, we've gotten some great feedback already on the story, but I would say, we were talking about this, Scott and I, even yesterday, this is the kind of story that people are going to read now, but people are going to read 20 years from now too.
Yeah.
There's that seminary student who's doing some research, or whoever, or some historian, about this chapter in the SBC and sort of our reckoning with sexual abuse and the changes that we've made and the reforms that we've made and all of those things. This is going to be a story that helps them a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah,
absolutely. That's something that you and I talk about all the time, that we live in a world that is click driven. And sometimes folks may wonder, why did they write that story, or why is that included in there? You and I talk about it all the time, that we are serving a bigger picture. We're certainly serving the audience today who will read. We don't forget you, and we don't take you for granted. We appreciate that. But we are thinking about our friends just a floor or two below us here in the Executive Committee building in Nashville at the Historic Library and Archives, that we know folks are going to go, and that they're going to look, and they're going to research, and they're going to try to learn so that they can make changes and implement things. And, writing papers is one thing. A lot of times action comes out of writing those papers.
Yeah, that's true. That is true.
So it's very, very important to journal this.
It's important, too. We felt, because of what's going to happen in June at the annual meeting, and we've talked about this, the messengers are going to be asked to vote on a budget that takes essentially $3 million off the top for legal costs.
Yeah.
And so this kind of helps answer those questions that people maybe that don't follow this really closely, maybe they only start paying attention really a few weeks before the annual meeting when they know they're going to go and be a messenger. This helps them answer those questions. Now, why are we doing this?
Yeah.
And this is why we're doing this. So an interesting little story. I wish, maybe not little story, long story. I kind of hope everyone reads it, though. Even if you remember a lot of these things, it'll be a good refresher for a lot of people.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's pivot now. Lifeway Research sent us a story this week, Laura. It says half of U.S. Protestant pastors say their churches are growing, but some warning signs remain about their congregational future. Talk to us a little bit about that one.
Yeah, I was really encouraged by this story. More than half, 52% congregations in this study. Now, this was not strictly Southern Baptist churches. This was, in fact, it was the study was sponsored by a company called Exponential. And so they were just looking at like a broad spectrum of churches. But 52% increased their worship service attendance by at least 4% in the last 2 years. And so once again, this is not necessarily rebounding from the pandemic, because it's only been in the past 2 years. You think most of that rebounding would have happened by 2 years ago. And so pretty encouraging, that church attendance in more than half of the churches has grown. The other 48% either remained within kind of plus or minus 4%, kind of remain right there where they are, or declined. That was 15% declined by at least 4%. 33% were kind of staying stable. So 15% did decline, but you also saw in this story that bigger churches are getting bigger and smaller churches are getting smaller, which is interesting, I thought. Especially those long-term established churches, which we talked about in the Lifeway story that we talked about maybe last week or week before. That there's less growth in those older churches, but more growth in the newer churches. And I think this is sort of a pattern that we've now seen for a while now. And so just a lot of this is another long story. In fact, this one's longer than the one we were just talking about as far as word count goes. But a lot of really good data, And Scott McConnell, the executive director there at Lifeway Research, he said, clearly the last 2 years of attendance growth was aided by people returning to regular attendance after the pandemic. Most pastors wish they had returned earlier, but their attendance is a source of optimism, though future growth will need to come from brand new contacts, he said. So, yeah, I guess he's saying that these are maybe some people coming back after the pandemic, and it just took them a really long time. But in order to maintain this growth, you can't rely on that anymore. You have to go out and find, evangelize and find new people.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so that's definitely an interesting story. All right, so we're about to kind of a similar story, deals with numbers, and it comes from Kentucky. And so I was thinking about this as we were prepping. So far we've shared with you about Tennessee, their disaster relief volunteer hours. We've shared with you, we're about to share with you some numbers from Kentucky and baptism there. We would love to have numbers from everybody. And so if you're out there, Baptist State Paper editor listening, if you are a state exec or someone on a state mission board staff, send us that information. We're not playing favorites here. This is just what we found this week. We would love to celebrate with you. We'd love to encourage folks who are serving, who are the Lord's doing great things through them, and so share that with us. So anyway, I just kind of feel compelled, like Tennessee, Kentucky, that they're not like we just have that data, right?
Yeah, right.
We're not playing favorites here. We just have that data.
We want to talk about
this week.
Everybody's data.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. So help us out with that. All right. So here we go. Kentucky Baptists are celebrating. This is from a Kentucky Today story this week. They're celebrating a surge in baptisms with 12,654 reported during the past reporting year. It ended March the 15th. And it's a significant increase, Laura, over the previous year and the highest year in almost a decade.
Yeah, it's 2016 was the last time the number was that high. And I wanted to run this story when Kentucky Today published it, and I read it, and I thought, we got to run this. I think it's a shot in the arm for everybody. Like you said, it's not that we're trying to single out Kentucky or whatever. This is fun for everybody to know about. Todd Gray, the executive director there in Kentucky, said, we're praising God for each of these 12,654 baptisms recorded by our churches last year. Just imagine what will happen if in our state, if KBC churches continue to faithfully engage their communities, faithfully preach the gospel, welcome those who are lost to hear the good news. We will see a new day in the Commonwealth, he said.
Yeah, very good. So congratulations to them. Praise the Lord for that great news. And we'd love to hear from you as well if you are not in Kentucky but other places. And we would love to share that information as well. All right, Laura, big deal down in New Orleans last week. Chuck Kelly, longtime president. He's actually now the president emeritus of the New Orleans Seminary. He spoke. It was the first time he had spoken in chapel since his retirement. So it was a big deal because of that. But it was even more of a big deal because he spoke about the passing of his wife, Rhonda, and about how the Lord has been faithful to him and how he has just known a sweetness from the Lord through this grief process. And so let me just say, Jamie Dew was just so encouraging and so gracious to Dr. Kelly. Happy to have him there on campus. He said, here's a man who gave us 23 years of his life and his devotion and his affection to this institution and our faculty and students. That alone makes you love him and have affection for him. He said when Hurricane Katrina came in 2005 and the place was absolutely devastated, Dr. Kelly was the one who made the decision to keep the seminary there in New Orleans. And I remember those days.
Me too. I was here at BP, and I remember that there was people saying, now why are we still there if there's risk of this kind of devastation? And Chuck Kelly was like, no. This seminary needs to be in this city.
Yeah. So I had invited. I was serving as a pastor. I just graduated in about 2003 from New Orleans Seminary, and in our association there in the Bowling Green, Kentucky area, we were having a missions conference, and I had the opportunity to pick the speaker and to go out and get the speaker. And so Dr. Kelly is who I asked to come and do that. Well, unfortunately, it was in late August, early September, and he was a little busy. I mean, it was in 2005, and he was really busy. And so obviously he could not leave New Orleans because of all the recovery efforts that were just starting there. But I had known his heart for evangelism and missions from school. One of my favorite classes ever in seminary was taught by Chuck Kelly and Junior Hill, and so I knew then. So I've known for 20 years about his passion to keep that seminary there in New Orleans and what that meant to him. All that said, Laura, this story though brought tears to my eyes.
Me too.
Maybe to yours as well.
Yeah, we talked about that. Yeah.
Yeah, and specifically about just how candid he was about sharing about his grief process over this last year with his beloved wife Rhonda passing.
Yeah, it was almost a year to the date when he spoke in chapel. And he said, if anybody ever told you that as long as you follow Jesus closely and serve him passionately, you would never have to worry about hard things or brutal circumstances in your life, they were wrong. Every single one of us will have our experience with dark days and difficult times. It's the way life is. It's a shock when it happens to you, but it's a reality that every one of us must face. There's a reason for it, and there is a purpose in it whenever it is your turn to be on the dark road. Yeah. It was really just very vulnerable, I felt, and very moving, and also just real encouraging because of just an example of faithfulness to the Lord, even when times are really hard. And I loved what he said. I know you liked this too. You said I think this is maybe where we both started choking up. It was not our fault, nor was it our doom. It was merely our turn. God is always prepared whenever trouble comes to you. And it's sad, and your heart breaks for him, but it's also really encouraging because we all are going to go down that dark road, as he calls it.
Yeah, absolutely. So just this past Sunday, I had the opportunity to preach in a church and then speak to church leaders after the service, a church that is going through a little bit of a difficulty as they search for their new pastor. And I used that quote exactly to them. And so I just encourage you that's one that it's worth memorizing and using over and over and over. And so thank you to Dr. Kelly for sharing that. So here it is one more time. It was not our fault, nor was it our doom. It was merely our turn. God is always prepared whenever trouble comes to you. And that's just so helped by that. So thank you to New Orleans Seminary for hosting Dr. Kelly. Thank you to him for opening his life to those students and to us one more time in sharing about that, knowing that we have been praying for him and will continue to pray for him as he moves forward. A little bit farther west, Laura, over in Fort Worth at Southwestern, we wanted to make a stop real quick and tell you a little bit about a panel that they had where they talked about the role of the cooperative program, and it came during their Founders Day Chapel. Just a really neat story from Southwestern.
Yeah, they had a panel consisting of Nathan Lorick, who is the executive director of the SBTC, Sandy Wisdom Martin, executive director of WMU, Madison Grace, who's the provost there at Southwestern, James Spivey, a church historian and a pastor there in Fort Worth, Texas at Gambrill Street Baptist Church, and Andy Pettigrew, who's director of the Next Gen Mobilization for IMB. And they had just a great conversation about IMB and told kind of personal stories about about CP, personal stories about how the cooperative program had helped them in their ministry and in their walk, and how it helps them even now as they're leading their organizations that they lead, and gave a little bit of history as we approach the 100th anniversary of the cooperative program coming up really soon.
Yeah.
And Madison Grace said that Baptists previously had multiple organizations that would go to churches and ask for donations, the societal method, as they call it. And he said they realized they were spending a lot of money trying to raise money. And so they thought there's got to be a better way to do this. And so they talked about L.R. Scarborough in 1919 and the 75 million campaign, and then how just over the next several years that led to the cooperative program in 1925. And so very interesting and very relevant discussion, panel discussion there at Southwestern.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, Madison Grace is a co-editor, along with Tony Wolf from South Carolina, of the forthcoming book, A Unity of Purpose, 100 Years of the SBC Cooperative Program. It'll be available right around the time of the annual meeting, and so make sure to grab one of those. And so Dr. Dockery asked Dr. Grace to define the cooperative program. And he said, this is a way to unify us as Southern Baptists in that one sacred effort that we are engaging in for kingdom advance. And so,
pretty good.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Great, encouraging story there about the work of the cooperative program and how Southern Baptists have been faithful and how God has been even more faithful to us through it over these 100 years. Speaking of 100 years, we cannot forget that 1925 is also the year that they ratified the Baptist Faith and Message in Memphis at Ellis Auditorium. And Laura, we're in our second part now of a series that we have from Charles Jones, a pastor and Baptist historian from Athens, Georgia, who is writing about the that process leading up to the adoption of the 1925 Baptist Faith and Message.
Yeah, he's going to write a total of 5 pieces for us. The first one was just about why they felt they needed a confession, and sort of a little bit of a retrospective of all the different confessions down through time, starting about 500 years ago. And then this one is about the specific time period in the 1920s and what was going on that made it the right time for the Baptist Faith and Message to come into existence. And it was some things that I had never really kind of connected all the dots before, so I was really interested to read this. So you may have heard of something called the modernist fundamentalist controversy, which I had heard of. But basically, you had kind of 2 tracks that started to diverge right around this time, and had been even before the 1920s. But you had, in Germany, you had the higher criticism, where they were questioning the authenticity of the Bible and whether you should take it literally and all of that. And then you also had Darwin's On the Origin of Species coming out in the 1850s, and just how over the next few decades it was becoming more and more sort of the accepted wisdom that you can't rely on the Bible and its account of creation, that really this is how it happened, and schools were beginning to teach evolution, and so you had, but I didn't remember that you also had looming in 1925 the Scopes monkey trial here in Tennessee, which was huge national news in the time. And I think Southern Baptists were it kind of building up to, we need to have a confession. We need to get on the record about what we believe and why we believe the Bible. And 1925 was the time to do that. And so it was a really interesting story. A lot of things that I knew, but put together in a way that I had never thought about before. And I would encourage everyone to read it, and then to stay tuned for the other pieces that he's going to write. The next one is going to be about the different personalities, the different men that came together to write the Baptist Faith and Message in 1925. So a really fun series, and fun to just remind yourself as we head into Dallas, and we're going to celebrate the 100th anniversary of both CP and BF&M, just to remind ourselves how it came about and why we needed it, and just to be thankful for it.
Yeah, absolutely. So make sure to check the 2 out that have already been published, and to stay tuned for the ones that are to come. All right. One final story, Laura, we wanted to pass along to folks. Karen Willoughby wrote a story for us about First Southern Baptist Church in Covina, California. And in that congregation, there are actually 2 congregations that make up one church. One of them is a Chinese-speaking congregation, and one of them is an English-speaking congregation. And the story talks to both of those pastors and kind of details how they came together and what it's like to worship in a diverse church like that. And so it's a really interesting piece. But the reason this kind of came on our radar was because Charles Grant here at the Executive Committee connected with those pastors, and they shared with us a list that they had created about just some practical application points for pastors. And when we saw that, we thought, this is really good. Why don't we have a story about this church and then also include that list of those practical application points as well? And so it's a story, and then that article from them at the bottom of it. It's actually from Dean LTT, who is the English-speaking pastor there at the church. And there are about 10 practical just pieces of advice. And let me just give you a few of them, because I thought they're very helpful. First, a healthy church starts with a high view of Scripture and the church. You can never say that too often or too much. It's very good. Do not take that for granted. A healthy church starts with a high view of Scripture and the church. Second, cultivate a genuine love for everyone in the church, regardless of which language congregation they attend. And so, in our church where we are, we have Swahili. The sermon is translated into Swahili. I know that there is a multi-ethnic church that meets there at the facility where you are, Laura, at your church. I mean, it just seems more and more that we're having churches with multi-ethnic, either in the actual service or meeting there on the property, same time, different times, things like that. And so cultivate genuine love for everyone in the church. Third, make full use of your emotional intelligence to build up relationships with other people by finding points of connection with them. I think about that before the service begins, or when the service ends, before you just rush out to the car and go on to lunch or wherever you're headed next. Being perceptive and getting to know people, building relationships with others. On and on it goes, and I just thought it was really helpful. And so I want to commend that to you. That story, it's called Second Generation Pastor of Chinese Church Offers Advice to His Peers. And so go find that at Baptist Press. I think you'll be encouraged by that, whether you are the lead pastor in your local church, or whether you're on staff, or whether you're a member of the church. Wherever you are, I think you'll be helped by reading that article.
Yeah, I agree. And he talks a little bit too about being a second generation in this Chinese church, and now how these second generation members of his church that speak English are sort of worshiping underneath the umbrella of these original founders of the church who speak Chinese, first generation, and just about even the walking that line of how do we do that? How do we co-pastor him and the senior pastor of the original congregation? And that there's some wisdom there that could be applied to all kind of situations.
Yeah, very interesting. All right, SBC emphasis calendar. It is Annie Armstrong Easter offering season. Don't forget about that. Make sure to check out all the resources from the North American Mission Board on that and share that with your church family. April 20th, just around the corner, is Easter Sunday, right? Very exciting.
Yep.
Happy to have that coming. April 27th, the week following Easter Sunday, is Baptism Sunday. And so the hope there is that the Lord will work through your outreach efforts around Easter, and you'll see folks come to faith. And maybe that April 27th would be the day that they would be baptized. And so I'm excited to share those with you as well. All right, that brings us to our history moment, Laura. You had to do some digging on this. We had to wait to get the recording started because she had to dig for this history moment.
Find anything else.
No.
I was hoping I would find something else about the person, but I couldn't find anything else.
All right.
So, but I kind of, after I read through this issue of BP again, I kind of thought, I'm just going to, this is like a day in the life of the SBC, kind of. So March 22nd, 1995, so basically 30 years ago, almost exactly, March 22nd, 1995, the lead story there, first of all, there are 17 stories in this one day.
Oh my goodness.
Of Baptist Press, which is like, what in the world? That's a lot of stories. But anyway, the first one is SBC will celebrate 150th year. Hear Graham and vote on structure.
Wow.
That's the headline.
Wow.
So that was going on in March of 1995. We were talking about, like you and I just now were talking about our celebrating the 100th anniversary of these things. This was talking about the SBC getting ready to celebrate its 150th birthday.
Wow.
They were going to meet in Atlanta that year, 1995, which they did. They were expecting, I think it said 20,000 something messengers that year in Atlanta. And they were talking about how they were doing the schedule so that they could give Billy Graham time to preach. He was going to preach, and everybody was excited about that.
Yeah.
And then they were going to vote, of course, on the new structure, the new century, and all of that in 1995. So just a lot of stuff going on. And I'm like, this is, the more things change, the more they stay the same. This looks real familiar. But so that's got that story, and then it's got several other stories about what to expect at the annual meeting, and the schedule is in there, the program, and all of that, and it just keeps going down, and you see all these things. And I was just scrolling through. It even previews what Billy Graham is maybe going to talk about, and all of this. And then there's this headline, which has nothing to do with the annual meeting at all, but it's a short story. Visit to hairdresser was divine appointment.
Uh-oh.
So it has nothing to do with the annual meeting, but a woman named Kim Hardy, who was commissioned to be a Southern Baptist home missionary March 18th during a service in Columbia, South Carolina, told those attending she found God can use simple incidents as witnessing opportunities. 7 years ago, so she's telling her testimony at her sending service, basically, which was in Columbia, South Carolina. 7 years ago, she went to her hairstylist and found the usual person was not in, and she would have to trust a substitute. She had recently taken a continuing witness training course at her church.
Yeah, CWT. I remember that.
And while she worried whether her hair would turn out all right, and the hairstylist was talking about her troubles relating to her teenage son, God told Hardy to witness. And she said, "Not today, Lord, I'm getting my hair done." But the feeling would not go away. And God continued to say, "Kim, witness." And she did witness. And the stylist replied, it was the first time someone explained Christianity the way that Hardy had.
Wow.
And the woman accepted Christ as her Savior. And it said her hair looked fine, and then she drove home. Well, later that day, she was watching the news, and she heard about a fatal car wreck. And she recognized the name. And she called the hair shop and learned that the person that had done her hair that day had died in a car accident.
Oh, my goodness.
And she had accepted Christ that very day.
Wow.
And so Hardy said, it's a scary thought to think that this might be the last opportunity for a person to hear about Christ.
Wow.
And that's it. It's a very short story. It just tells that. Now, there is a Kim Hardy that's very active in Southern Baptist life. But I don't know if it's the same Kim Hardy. And so if she listens, or somebody that knows her listens, call me or email me and let me know that, because I didn't want to assume, because it's kind of a common name.
Yeah.
So somebody let me know if it's the same Kim Hardy that we have some stories about in BP, who was a home missionary in the mid-1990s and told this really compelling story just about how, when the Holy Spirit impresses on you, you better do it.
Yeah.
You better do it.
Wow.
And this story is sort of just jammed in there right among all of these stories about the annual meeting and the SBC politics of the day and all of that. And here's this little story about evangelism.
Yeah.
I loved it.
That's fantastic. So I'm thinking we do stories about statistics, and we do stories about finances, and we do stories about structure and about meetings and all of that. But when it comes down to it, that story right there is what it's all about.
Yep.
That's what we're here to do.
Yep, that's true. And as always, Brandon, we had a lot of stories that we did today. Not 17, thank goodness, but a lot. At least 7 or 8 most days. And most of the time, we don't have time to talk about them all. And so you need to go to Baptist Press and look at these stories. And pretty soon, we will be running our own stories, looking forward to Dallas. We have pretty soon, within the next month, probably we'll have our issue where we've got we probably will have 17 or 20 stories about all that's going to be happening in Dallas. And you can find all of that and a lot of great stories about evangelism and baptisms and all of that at baptistpress.com. Thanks for listening.